Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C. That Knows a Lot, Dr. Waluigi. You know what, folks? It's really great to be a Godzilla fan nowadays. Not only do we have a plethora of movies, with the newest film being released at the time I'm writing this episode, a television series that just got a second season, and the most recent movie getting a well-deserved Oscar win for the amazing effects these movies are known for. So with all that being said, I'd like to honor the King of the Monsters on his 70th birthday by doing my first ranking video on the first era of Godzilla. Why only the Showa era? Because I feel like the Showa era gets a lot of undeserved hate, and it's important to look at the King of the Monsters' roots in order to appreciate what we have today, and show that there are good things about this era of the King. Also because doing a video of all the movies would take too long, and I have other things I want to review. As for how I'm going to rank each movie, I'm going to do it as a top 15 list. However, I'm not calling this a top 15, as I feel like all of these movies have different reasons why people can enjoy or watch them, and these are just my personal opinions on how I would rank each of the movies. So without further ado, here is my ranking of the Godzilla Showa era movies. Number 15. Godzilla's Revenge. We begin this ranking with what many G-fans consider the worst of all the Showa-era movies. Godzilla's Revenge, or All Monsters Attack, is the 10th Godzilla movie that came out after Destroy All Monsters, which was supposed to be the last of the Godzilla movies. However, the movie made enough money to continue the Showa era for another 5 movies, and sadly, the first of these movies started with a whimper. The biggest problem with this movie is its premise, where it follows a little kid who's a huge fan of Godzilla, and through wacky events and his own active imagination, he ends up on Monster Island where he befriends Minya, Godzilla's son, and they both learn to overcome the bullies they deal with. Yeah, notice how this movie seems very kid-centered. Well, that's because this movie was made during a time when parent groups were complaining about how violent media was becoming, and this meant a lot of filmmakers were forced to make certain movies kid-friendly. Which means that this movie has a lot, and I do mean a lot, of kids' movie tropes, like having a dumb message for the kids to learn, showing some playful moments with Minya and the main character, and overall just being really cutesy and whiplash-inducing when we go back and forth to Monster Island and the real world, where the kid uses the things he learned from Minya to defeat some bank robbers who kidnapped him. Bottom line, the only thing this movie has going for it is the moments where the kid character goes to Monster Island, and we get to see some decent clips from other Godzilla movies, and the new monster that Minya fights named Gabara. But the rest of this movie is just slow, boring, and too cute to be entertaining for any Godzilla fan. Number 14. Godzilla Raids Again. Yes, I'm putting the second movie this low on the list. Why? Because it's fucking boring! The movie follows a pilot who crash lands on an iceberg where he discovers another Godzilla fighting the first monster to be made for the Godzilla series, Anguirus. Once the pilot gets saved, he tells the Japanese government of what he saw, and they start to make plans to defeat Godzilla. For the first sequel to the original Godzilla, you'd think it would be as dark and interesting as the first movie, and have some cool fight scenes with Anguirus. But nope, this movie drags out a lot of the scenes with the humans just talking and has even less Godzilla moments in it. Hell, Anguirus only appears in the first 3 minutes of the movie and then he's gone, never to be seen again until 7 movies later. What's even worse is that the way they defeat Godzilla takes over 10 fucking minutes, and all it is just the same scene of a plane shooting the same spot at the same iceberg over and over again. Number 13. Destroy All Monsters. As I previously mentioned, this movie was supposed to be the last of the Godzilla movies ever made, and with what the filmmakers had planned, it sounded good. On paper. The premise is that now all of the kaiju in the Godzilla universe have been captured and live peacefully on Monster Island. However, some aliens come down to Earth to conquer it by using said kaiju to cause massive destruction to our world, and it's up to a group of humans to stop the aliens and get the monsters to come together and fight against long-running Godzilla villain, King Ghidorah. So from just that description, you'd think that this would be a fun monster brawl movie with some fun human moments of them trying to stop the aliens from destroying the Earth. And it is, But the problem is that the movie focuses more on the human characters, and we don't get to see the monsters fighting until the last 10 minutes, and the rest of the movie is just stock footage. Even the final brawl is just a few of the monsters ganging up on King Ghidorah. I don't think this is the worst Godzilla movie I've ever seen, but for how cool of an idea this movie could have been, it's just disappointing and depressing to get through. Number 12. King Kong vs. Godzilla. The first crossover movie with the King of Skull Island is sadly very disappointing, which is due to the version that we got in the West. The movie follows a group of people working for a pharmaceutical company that are being forced by their boss into getting a mascot for their TV shows they're sponsoring. They then discover Skull Island, where a small group is sent to capture Kong and use him in their promotional campaigns. Meanwhile, Godzilla has freed himself from the iceberg he was frozen in from Godzilla Raids Again, and thus leads to massive destruction and the first brawl between these two kings. So if this movie has such a cool premise, why is it this low on the list? Sadly, the big reason is because of the dubbed version we got here in the West that has been the only available version for us Westerners to watch. I am aware that the newer releases of these movies includes the original version of the movie, but sadly the dub of this movie is the only version I've seen, and honestly, it's a mixed bag with cool fight scenes and annoyingly long scenes with the human characters. If anyone knows if the original version of the movie is available online, please let me know, as I would really like to see it. Number 11. Invasion of Astro Monster. For the movie that gave us the second appearance of King Ghidorah, it feels like a downgrade compared to his first appearance. The movie follows a group of astronauts flying to a planet that was recently discovered behind Jupiter called Planet X. There, they run into aliens who ask for help in defeating the Astro Monster, or Monster Zero, who it turns out is actually King Ghidorah. So the humans allow the aliens to take Godzilla and Rodan in order to fight Ghidorah, and in exchange, the aliens give them a cure to cancer and offer their friendship. Or so it seems. This is an entry in the Godzilla series that I do like for the monster fights, the character moments are an improvement over the ones in K vs. G, and that the writing is also a vast improvement. But sadly, the movie is very predictable, with the aliens betraying the humans and plan on using the three monsters to destroy the Earth, then subjugate the human race, with the only way to stop them is with a nerdy inventor who just so happens to be working on an invention that could stop them. I get that this movie came out in the 60s and that this type of movie was very popular, but nowadays this plot is tired and boring. Though I will give the movie this: it gave us the Godzilla victory dance. Number 10. Terror of Mechagodzilla. Another sequel that I find very disappointing compared to the one that came before it, but is better than the last entry on this list. After the events of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the aliens who created Mechagodzilla start rebuilding him while getting a professor to help them take down Godzilla with another monster that he's able to control called Titanosaurus. However, some humans discover this plot and try to put an end to these alien invaders, as well as try to save the professor and his daughter. Again, this movie has some really good fights, and I like the design of Titanosaurus, but I do find the human subplot to be a little boring, and the fights, while they are good in this movie, aren't as good as the previously mentioned Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. But for the actual last movie made for the Showa era, it went out with a bigger bang than Destroy All Monsters ever did if that would have been the last movie. Number 9. Son of Godzilla. Okay, despite everyone hating this movie because of Minya's introduction, I feel that it does have more charming moments than what people give it credit for, and Minya is the lesser of the problems in this movie. A group of scientists are set up on an island testing a weather machine to allow food to grow in desolate areas. Unfortunately, their experiments have also enlarged some of the local wildlife, which create the large praying mantis kaiju Kamacuras, where they encounter a large egg that contains Godzilla's son, Minilla, or Minya for short. Where the rest of the movie has Godzilla teach Minilla on how to be the next king until they fight the other stronger monster on the island, Spaiga or Kumonga. A lot of people hate this movie for the introduction of Minya, as his scenes were annoyingly cute to a lot of G fans. But personally, I found his scenes with Godzilla not that annoying. Sure, they go on for a bit too long, and there aren't as many fights in the movie, but the moments we do get with Minya and Godzilla I personally found enjoyable. Especially the ending scene, which I won't spoil here. Once again, my big issue with this movie are the human characters, who again are really annoying and drag the movie out. Especially the reporter character who comes to the island to get his next story, but has no purpose being on this island and is just there to be the stupid comic relief character that you end up wanting to smack in the face and tell him to fuck off. Number 8. Godzilla vs. Gigan. This is the movie that I find does have its issues, but they mostly end up being more nitpicky compared to the problems with a lot of the previous movies on this list. The movie involves giant alien cockroaches from the M Space Hunter Nebula that take over dead human bodies as they plan to colonize the Earth after their planet was destroyed. However, a group of humans discovers their plan and with the help of Godzilla and Anguirus plan to defeat them and their two giant monsters, King Ghidorah and the giant hook-handed, saw-bladed, stomach-wielding chicken, Gigan. This movie is very fun with an interesting mystery, at least for this series. The human characters were way more tolerable than the previous movies on this ranking list, and the fights between the monsters was the beginning of when Godzilla movies got really gory with a lot of blood being shed in this movie. However, despite the dark and gory moments in this movie, it does still have its quirky moments, like with Godzilla and Anguirus talking to each other in the English dub and having speech bubbles in the original Japanese dub. Number 7. Mothra vs. Godzilla. For the first crossover between two Japanese monsters, it feels like Godzilla was thrown in at the last minute with a retelling of the original Mothra movie. After a tsunami, a giant egg washes up on the outskirts of Japan, and the villagers sell it to a businessman who wants to use it as an attraction in his theme park. Later, the twin fairies come to the man and demand the return of the egg to Infant Island before Mothra comes and destroys all of Japan. Again. Unfortunately, not only do the bad guys not release the egg and try to capture the twin fairies to put them up as an attraction, but Godzilla awakens and sets out to destroy Japan once again, as well as go after the Mothra egg. This movie is one that I think has interesting ideas and the potential for a great series of fights, but it's executed poorly with the abysmal pacing. To the point that the movie focuses more on the Mothra part of the movie, and Godzilla just shows up at a random point in the middle. Even the fights are lame, with Godzilla fighting Mothra once and then fighting her kids in a long drawn-out silly string match. But it does have some good Godzilla destructive moments. Number 6. Godzilla vs. Hedorah. This is a movie that I personally enjoy for its weird direction, though I am willing to admit it does have a lot of flaws that should put it lower on a list like this. In this movie, a scientist discovers that a pollution monster is being formed called Hedorah and is attacking all of the big polluting buildings for food, to the point that it kills people with just its murky touch or the toxic gas it releases. But the citizens need not worry as Godzilla comes in to stop the horrible toxic terror of Hedorah. Upon my first viewing of this movie, I will admit that I didn't like it. I thought it was too campy and it had way too many weird moments in it. But as I re-watched it again, I saw it as the movie to somewhat break the cycle of the cheesy kids Godzilla movies, as this movie had a lot more dark moments like seeing a person melt at Hedorah's touch, as well as Hedorah itself being an interesting and versatile monster for Godzilla to fight, especially since this movie came out in the 70s and most kaiju monsters at the time had pretty lame designs. Number 5. Godzilla vs. Megalon. This is the movie that, in my opinion, perfectly blends the campiness of the 60s and 70s, with the creative side of the early 60s sci-fi genre and the rising popularity of the spy genre. A group of people living under the earth are angered by the people above testing nuclear weapons as they are destroying their world. So they send their monster, a giant beetle named Megalon, to attack those of us that live above ground. At the same time, the people known as the Seatopians go to a trio of inventors to capture their newly made robot, Jet Jaguar, so that he can help destroy the world above. However, once he is freed from their control, the scientists send him to look for Godzilla to fight Megalon. One of the things that might turn some people off is that this movie feels like a pilot for a series for Jet Jaguar. At the time this movie came out, Japan was going through a superhero phase, which was often a combination of humans that turn into superheroes or creating giant robots. But combine that with the greatest monster of all time, and you get a movie with a lot of heroic potential. Another thing that I will admit, though, that people might not like, is that this movie did come out at a time when Toho had to reuse a lot of footage, especially since this movie includes scenes from Godzilla vs. Gigan, since the aliens from that movie come and give the Cetopians Gigan to fight our heroes. But I think from a story perspective, this one is just fun and puts me in a good mood when it does get to the fight scenes. Number 4. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Another movie that isn't loved by Godzilla fans, but I think is one that has its charm. 3 friends try to steal a yacht in order to look for one of their group's older brother after he's become lost at sea. This ends up leading to the 3 being captured by a terrorist group called the Red Bamboo that controls a giant krill monster called Ebirah. Fortunately, they escape and find Godzilla asleep on the island and get him to help defeat Ebirah, while the group tries to stop the terrorists and set the other prisoners from Infant Island free. The big thing about this movie is that this was the beginning of when the Godzilla movies started being targeted to children, with this movie in particular having a lot of comedic moments with the human characters, and even some of the fights are a little silly. But I think that this movie does have much better comedic moments than later Godzilla movies, and those fights between Godzilla and Ebirah are still some of the best I've watched in this era of Godzilla. Especially since the next movie was Son of Godzilla, which made the humans even more annoying and unbearable to sit through. Number 3. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. This is one of the goriest, violent, most crazy fights in a Godzilla movie I've ever seen, and I love every minute of it. In this movie, an alien race has created a robotic duplicate of Godzilla that they disguise and use to start attacking Earth, including severely injuring Anguirus. However, a priestess and 3 archaeologists discover a prophecy of 2 monsters that will come and defeat Mechagodzilla, who are the real Godzilla, and another new monster, the lion god, King Caesar. This movie is one of the best that the Showa era made, as it gave us one of Godzilla's best villains and the best fights in any Godzilla movie. Even the human scenes are some of the best in the series, as the characters feel like they serve a purpose, as opposed to having them act as more like bystanders. If there is one flaw with the movie, it is that it does drag a little in the middle, especially when the priestess has to call King Caesar by singing twice, which does get a little annoying. Number 2. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. The movie that introduced us to Godzilla's greatest villain gives you exactly what you want. A princess is possessed by an alien from Venus who warns the people of Earth of a coming alien threat that destroyed her home, which it turns out is Ghidorah the Three-Headed Space Dragon. With her other prophecies, it's up to Mothra, Godzilla, and Rodan to put an end to the alien menace. While I wouldn't say that this is the most interesting plot or has the best monster brawls in the Showa era, it does have some great human moments and a fun banter scene between the 3 heroic monsters. Plus, for the first Ghidorah movie, it shows that the three-headed dragon is no slouch when he comes down to destroy the Earth, as his city-destroying scenes are another highlight in the Godzilla franchise. Number 1. Gojira. Of course this movie was going to top the list. It's the movie that started it all and still holds up to this day, despite the suit's age. I think the main reason why so many people, myself included, like this movie so much is that despite the movie being about a giant monster destroying Japan, it takes itself super seriously and is still one of the few movies in this series to show the destruction and misery that comes from something like a giant destructive force of nature. It's something I think more modern audiences should watch as an example of how effective a movie can be for the atmosphere and the emotions a movie can give. And if you consider that without this movie, we wouldn't have the other amazing movies, including the best recent movie, Godzilla Minus One, or any other kaiju monster movies that, while varying in quality, made Godzilla the household name that he's become today. Phew, that was a mouthful, but it was worth it to show my love to the king of the monsters himself. As always, thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, hail to the king, baby. Good night, everyone.